couple of minutes to join. Yeah. Yeah, I see them adding up. Great. Wait a minute or two so people who are joining us online. You can tell me when to start. We can get started? Okay. There's something echoing here. I think it's coming. Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And it's great to have you here for this very special event, the special Grand Rounds that ICAP is sponsoring. And it's entitled The New Frontier in HIV Pre-Exposure Prophylaxis, Lenacapavir Update. So I'm Wafa El-Sadr. I know people in the room here, and I know some of the people online, but it's great to have you here today. And I think it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker. So our guest speaker is Dr. Moupali Das, and I'll give you a very brief introduction to many of her accomplishments thus far. So Moupali is an infectious disease, HIV trained physician, and she has a background in academic medicine and public health. And she currently serves as the Vice President for Clinical Development, HIV Prevention and Virology Pediatrics at Gilead Sciences. And in her position, her current position, she leads a team that pursues the overall development, the whole overall development cascade, the strategy from concept to design to execution of HIV prevention trials, all the way from phase 1 to phase 4 studies. Beyond that, I think she's been very dedicated. In addition to shepherding all these products along the pathway that I just mentioned, she's been incredibly dedicated to ensuring that there's efficient development. There's also attention to regulatory approval. And that supports what matters, as we all know, which is rapid access to innovative products to help us end the HIV epidemic. So she's going to talk to you about the PURPOSE program. So for the past 5 years, Moupali has led the PURPOSE program in HIV prevention that's based at Gilead Sciences. And she's really brought a lot of innovation in the design of these studies, in the implementation, and she's brought attention to health equity and really laying the ground for the success of this whole program. I need to tell you that for this work, she and 2 of her colleagues received the 2025 Manny Baumick Breakthrough of the Year Prize. Congratulations, Moupali, that's a big deal. And this is on behalf of the whole Gilead Sciences team for their work on Lenacapavir, which I think has been named by Science magazine as the Breakthrough of the Year as well. So just to give you a bit of background, so Moupali got her bachelor's degree at Harvard, but she went to medical school right here at Columbia and did her internal medicine training here also at Columbia. So we're very happy to welcome her back. And after that, she went all the way across the country, California at UCSF for fellowship in infectious disease, and also she obtained also a master's in public health from the University of California in Berkeley. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you, Moupali, to Mailman, to ICAP, and to Columbia. Hand it over to you.
I think we have to turn the audio off here. It's already off. Okay, all right, sorry. Okay, there's like an echo. Sorry, you guys, we're having some technical difficulty. Okay, all right, echo gone. Great. Thank you, Wafa, for that very kind introduction. It's great to be home in New York City, and I'm delighted to talk to you all about this topic, which we call the Purpose Program, Prevention with Purpose, and it certainly has been our purpose for the last several years for me since 2018. Okay, so because I was coming home to Columbia, I just was looking through some photos from back in the day, and this was my first patient with HIV at Incarnation Children's Center on Audubon Street back in 1997. So it was good to dig that out of the archives, if you will. But I've been very interested in working in HIV since my college days. And one of the people I worked with was Paul Farmer in college, and I got to spend time there with him in Haiti when during medical school and residency here at Columbia. And one of the times I was with him, he was writing this book called Infections and Inequalities. And my favorite quote from the book is that infections track along the fault lines of social inequality. And my corollary to that is that innovation, we need to innovate with intention, or we can unwittingly exacerbate these disparities. And I think, particularly when we're making novel medications for HIV treatment and prevention, we have to think of how to do it in a way that is inclusive and really focused on the people who are most disproportionately affected by HIV. So many of you may be familiar with this, but I've been at Gilead since 2013, and so I got there really during a very busy time for us in HIV treatment and prevention with the development of all these single tablet regimens, including Elvitegravir with TAF-FTC, Rilpivirine with TAF-FTC, Simtuza, and I started working on PrEP in 2018. I started working on PrEP in 2016, on the Discover program, and I also started working on Lenacapavir, or the capsid inhibitor, in 2018. So this timeline of our medications in HIV is consistent with my timeline personally being at the company after my time at the New York City and San Francisco health departments. I think all of us would agree that there's a significant unmet need for more choices for HIV prevention. We have way too many infections every year, and only a third of the folks who should be on PrEP are really on PrEP in the United States, and that number is even lower globally. There's many barriers to the low uptake of PrEP, including a low perception of PrEP benefit, adherence challenges with daily oral PrEP, or dislike or challenges with frequent intramuscular injections, and greater demands on health systems, and of course, all the isms, the systemic sociostructural factors. And we think the solution is to innovate both in science and in health equity. So our scientific innovation in the Purpose Program really included the product, the twice-yearly subcutaneous Lenacapavir, and the counterfactual background HIV incidence design. If anyone's interested in that, I can talk to you about that afterwards. But also really the 4 pillars of purpose, which include partnerships, including the voice of the people who would most benefit from PrEP and the community. We're very happy to have one of our members of the Global Community Advisory Group for Purpose 2, Charlie Peterson, who's here with us today, as well as a focus on person-centric design, and really a focus on inclusion and equity, particularly of folks who are most disproportionately affected by HIV. So I think one of the things that I didn't understand until I joined this pharmaceutical company, Gilead, which I honestly didn't think that I would be working at a pharmaceutical company when I was doing my training at Columbia and UCSF. But one of the things I truly didn't understand is how much innovation beyond just figuring out the drug. And one of the things that's really exciting about capsid is how many, and like I don't really remember the biochemistry enough, but all of the pink stuff that's getting bigger and bigger, that's my definition of it, is all of the different things that they tried. And we tried over 3,000 compounds, and it took us 6 to 19 years with iterative innovation to come up with the lenacapavir final product. And so it was kind of this cycle of designing something, making it, testing it. And we're all hopeful that maybe AI can help us improve this delay, but we tried thousands and thousands of molecules. The first compounds didn't work out, and we kept going, and that's what we did to develop the drug. The other piece that I think is really, sorry, why is this not showing up? Okay. This slide was supposed to remind me to tell you about all the different groups of people within the company that work on drugs and drug development. So it's not just the folks in the chemistry lab and the basic scientists. We often think of that when we think of drug development. But there are people who have expertise in formulations and formulation chemistry, which is a field I honestly didn't know about before I joined the company. And these people are so brilliant. They figure out how to take the API, which is like the actual product, and solubilize it and get it into the formulation. And that also is a science within and of itself. So I think that I wanted to highlight that piece. Okay, so here, so this is another iterative process with tech development and research and manufacturing. And these folks in process chemistry, formulations, are the people who took the lead and helped develop it by improving the potency, by improving the nature of the molecule. And lenacapavir is really insoluble. So back in 2006, when we first started working on lenacapavir, that was not good, right? Because we didn't want to have an insoluble molecule, because at that time we were trying to develop one pill once a day. That was our goal back then. But then now its weakness became its greatest strength because it is insoluble, so it can hang out in a depot under your skin and slowly elute out over time. And that makes it have the long-acting properties that allow us to give it twice a year. And we're working on a new formulation that can be given once a year, and that's in clinical trials now. I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. So this is a summary of the entire timeline. So the capsid project started in 2006, and some of you will remember, and some of you are way too young to remember, but that is around the time we were working on ATRIPLA, right? So that was the one pill once a day timeline. And then the picture of these dots are the like every dot is a molecule that we tried, and we got to a first-gen molecule. It didn't work. Then we got to a second-gen molecule, and then we finally, in 2016, developed the lenacapavir capsid inhibitor, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. And the other piece that people may not be aware of is that lenacapavir is approved as Sunlenca for the treatment of highly treatment-experienced individuals. So these are people with HIV with multiple mutations who don't really have other options, and given in co-administered with other antiretrovirals. That was approved back in 2022. And since then, as Wafa mentioned, we were honored to receive the 2023 Breakthrough Award, and then we also received, Gilead received the award from Science Magazine that honors people who got the breakthrough. And the exciting thing about that award is it really recognized a community member, Gilead, and the scientist Wes Sundquist, who discovered the original capsid molecule at University of Utah. And then, of course, we had the approval of Yes2Go, which is lenacapavir for PrEP in 2025. Okay. So lenacapavir is also the foundation of our long-acting portfolio. So we're not speaking about treatment today, but it can be used in combination therapy for treatment, both for heavily treatment-experienced people, as I mentioned, but also we're looking at other options because we're trying to get from breakthroughs, which I think would be a weekly oral or a quarterly injectable on the treatment side, to game changers, which would be a twice yearly injectable. And we've proof of concept that Len plus 2 broadly neutralizing antibodies does work in the first Q6 month regimen. That, of course, may not be super generalizable because of the broadly neutralizing antibodies, but we are working on trying to see if we can make a twice yearly injectable treatment, which would be incredibly helpful. And on the PrEP side, we have twice yearly Len now, and we're working on the once yearly formulation, and we're really trying to also figure out weekly and monthly oral formulations, because I think that there's a lot of people who don't love an injection, so a long-acting oral might be helpful for those folks. Okay, so what is the PURPOSE program? I like to use this tree because I want to highlight the roots of the program, which are our 4 pillars of health equity and purpose, as well as the proof of concept from non-human primates and the PK and safety database in persons with and without HIV. So Purpose 1, as many of you may know, was a cisgender adolescent girls and young women trial in South Africa and Uganda. Purpose 2 was in cis gay men and other men who have sex with men, trans women, trans men, and gender non-binary individuals. And this was the first time trans men and gender non-binary individuals had been specifically and intentionally included. And this trial took place in the United States, South Africa, Peru, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and Thailand. Other unique aspects of the program included, we had nested qualitative studies, which made me really happy because I'm not a behavioral scientist, but I try to play one. And so we had these in-depth qualitative interviews, and we also had quantitative participant reported outcomes throughout the study. And we're collaborating with HPTN on Purpose 3 and Purpose 4, which are in US cisgender women and US people who inject drugs, as well as working on Purpose 5, which is taking place in France and the UK. And 3, 4, and 5 are populations that couldn't be included in Purpose 1 and 2 because of relatively lower rates of background HIV incidence there. So we first started our program in December of 2019, and we had a meeting in Kigali, Rwanda, where we met with folks, and one of the specific questions that I asked was, should we include pregnant and lactating women in our clinical trials? And should we include adolescents in our clinical trials? We had never done that before, and there was a significant inertia against that inclusion, but it was something that many folks had been advocating for, including the PHASES program and various other groups, pioneered by folks here that have been really advocating for the inclusion of pregnant women. And one of the most memorable experiences from this meeting was there was a young woman who was 17 years old who had been sitting at the conference table, and I didn't realize until she stood up that she was quite pregnant. And I was asking, should we include teenagers and should we include pregnant people in the trial? And she said, you have to include people like me. And it was, we can show all the data, the preclinical data and the other data about the products to try to convince ethics committees and other folks. But it was incredibly helpful to be able to tell the story of this person asking for her and her friends to be protected against HIV and get access to products through the clinical trials. So her story was quite compelling, and I retell it quite often. And so we did. And we set up very intense, committed, and consistent community and stakeholder engagement. And this all happened like during the pandemic, which was another piece. But we started with the stakeholder engagement in 2019. We worked with our friends and colleagues at AVAC, who helped set up meetings with us, engaging with folks in New York City, as well as South African and Ugandan advocates. We set up, like 2-day Zoom meetings with colleagues in South Africa and Uganda. And we also did a consultation with US Women, which is one of the reasons why we got into doing Purpose 3, HPTN 102. We kicked off our GCAGs in 2021, and then we kept meeting via video conference every other month with our community advisors. And then we also had face-to-face meetings once everyone could travel. And we brought the community together with the investigators in the sites in South Africa, in Brazil, in Argentina, and in Thailand. And I think that was very memorable to have the community together with the investigators and the sites. And then we continue to have larger stakeholder engagements in Amsterdam in November. So we had one last year, and folks are going later this year. And that's a broader set of community engagement beyond just the study-specific global community advisory groups. And this is what people told us, and this is what we did. So we got a lot of excellent feedback from the Purpose GCAGs and other stakeholders. And you'll see, like, we were asked to look at gender-affirming hormones and PrEP drug interactions, make sure the site PIs and staff were representative of the participant population that we were trying to enroll, include pregnant women, and to specifically to study pharmacokinetics of lenacapavir in pregnancy, breast milk, and infants, which we did. And I'll show you some of the results, and also highlight that we'll be presenting the gender-affirming and the long-acting contraceptive data at ID Week, and also some other drug-drug interaction data at the European AIDS Clinical Society meeting that's taking place right now. So this was the Purpose 1 study design. I think people are familiar with it. It's been published in the New England Journal and presented by Linda Gale Becker. So I won't go into great detail, but I will just note that participants were randomized 2-to-1 in Len and FTAF, and then 1/5 of the participants were in daily Truvada. And the primary endpoints were Len versus the background incidence, which was estimated through this cross-sectional incidence cohort. And then the secondary analysis compared Len and FTAF to Truvada in Purpose 1. And Purpose 2 had a very similar design, except for, since we've already demonstrated the efficacy of FTAF in this population, this was 2-to-1 Len versus Truvada. These are the countries that, and the distribution of participants in South Africa and Uganda, as well as with most participants coming from Brazil, followed by the United States and the other countries as shown. We're very proud of the inclusion in the studies, not just for inclusion's sake, but also because these populations are the key populations that are most disproportionately affected by HIV. So 2/3 were people of color, 63% were Hispanic Latina, and 22% were gender diverse. Now, I also worked on the Discover trial. There we had less than 0.1% of trans people, trans women, and here we were able to get to 22%, which we're delighted by. The baseline characteristics are shown just to highlight that the range in the studies went from 16 to 74. So Purpose 2 had quite a wide age range, which is a bit atypical, but informative for the Purpose 2 population. I guess good news for us as we age into continuing to have fun and being eligible for a PrEP trial. And then I just wanted to note that people did have a high burden of sexually transmitted infections at baseline, and a lot of chemsex with self-reported use of stimulants in Purpose 2. Prior use of PrEP was lower in South Africa, Uganda than in the Purpose 2 geographies. And most people had never used PrEP. And I think that's really important as we talk about uptake and access for lenacapavir. We were able to find people out of prevention care and bring them into prevention care in the trial. So here is the most exciting results. So the efficacy, 0 infections, 100% efficacy for Len. in purpose 1 and 2 infections, so 96% efficacy for purpose 2. So all in all, over 99.9% of people who received lenacapavir did not acquire HIV. Here are the results for the secondary analyses comparing to oral PrEP standard of care. So 100% compared to Truvada and 89% Len versus Truvada in purpose 2. FTAF, no difference really from Truvada and from background incidents, honestly. Like people just in South Africa and Uganda, the 16 to 25-year-old young women were not taking their pills. And so the adherence to Len injections was much higher than to oral adherence to Truvada. So in purpose 1, so to look at this graph, green is 4 or more pills per week, which is associated with 90+ efficacy of oral Truvada. And then yellow is 2 to 3 doses, and low, which is not associated with efficacy, is less than 2 doses per week in red. So most people, by the end of the 52 weeks, 93% of the women were not taking their pills. Purpose 2 had higher adherence to oral PrEP in the beginning, but it did drop off from 82% to 62%. And this was in a 10% sample that was representative of the entire population, where we did dried blood spot analysis. So very rigorous biomarkers of adherence. Okay, just because this was the other trial that I worked on, and I really like to make this point. Does oral PrEP work? Absolutely. And the men in the Discover trial took 2 pills once a day with incredibly high adherence. So 96%, dropping a little bit to 86% by week 96, but consistently high adherence in oral PrEP. So I don't want the message from the purpose trials to be that oral PrEP does not work. Like oral PrEP is an excellent option for people who want to take it. And our goal really is to develop multiple different options so people have choices to figure out what works best in their life. And then with purpose 1, the odds of HIV acquisition were 89% lower in the people who took more than 2 pills per week on FTAF. And that's consistent with the findings from the Discover trial, but in the Discover trial, there was much higher adherence, as I noted on the prior slide. Okay, so I wanted to highlight, we had quite a number of pregnancies, and the outcomes of the pregnancies were consistent with what is expected in the geography. So we had similar rates of miscarriages and induced and abortions and spontaneous miscarriages compared to background rates. So the available pregnancy outcomes were similar to those expected for the population. I also wanted to highlight where we did the trial, and we do have permission to share this photo with you. These are our purpose babies from Uganda, so a subset of them. And as we were doing the study, the Ugandan investigators asked us to provide mama kits. Now, people may not be familiar with this, but when you go to deliver in Uganda, you have to provide your own gloves and materials. So you need to provide these resources. And if you don't have them, they will not deliver your baby. So to support the safety of the women, we started providing those specifically in Uganda, where it was required. And you can see the labor ward in the middle picture there and the maternity wing. And I like to have this picture on the left-hand side of the very the wooden boats that the girls took, because a lot of the girls in Uganda lived on Kalangala and these other islands in Lake Victoria, and they had to take boats to the mainland to the site. So it was really quite an ordeal for them to be participating in the study, and we wanted to support people and help them get to their healthy babies. We had quite a few set of twins in the study as well, which I was as a twin mom, happy to know about. But people always ask, why were there more pregnancies than people who got pregnant? It's because we had a lot of twins. Okay, and then in terms of safety, there was nothing really surprising. We understand FTEF and FTDF quite well. And with lenacapavir, if you look at adverse events, excluding the injection site reactions, very sort of typical PrEP adverse events, lots of STIs in the Purpose 2 population, and in Purpose 1, pretty standard reported adverse events. And we'll take a little bit of a deviation here to talk about how Len works. Len works by forming a drug depot under your skin. So it's injected into the subcutaneous fatty space. And for people who have less fat, you can feel it after the injection, and that is the drug depot and your body's response to it. Like some people get more robust responses, like to mosquito bites or other things. And so they may have more of a fibrous cap around the drug depot. And if they're thin, it can be palpated. We did a lot of stuff to help people have reasonable injections. So pre-injection ice worked really well. It was much better than any of the like using lidocaine cream or oral pills. Pre-injection ice worked better. And we also spent a lot of time explaining the proper technique. If you go too shallow, which is kind of how we all learn how to do subcutaneous injections, you can get into the actual dermis instead of under the dermis. And then you get sort of like a peau d'orange, and it can be quite painful because there's not a lot of space in the dermis for this injection. So you really need to make sure you're at a 45 or 90-degree angle. If a person has more subcutaneous fat, you can go in at a 90-degree angle. If they're thinner, you should go between 90 and 45, but not at a 30-degree angle, which is sometimes how we're taught to give sub-Q injections. Post-injection ice also works well. So the green bands here are no injection site reactions. Grade 1 is yellow and grade 2 is red. And it's important to note that most people did not have injection site reactions. In Purpose 1, nodule pain and swelling were the most common injection site reactions, and in Purpose 2 was nodule pain and erythema. And interestingly, and this has been noted in all studies of injectables, ISRs decreased over time. So I think that's a combination of people knowing what to expect and improved technique in our trial. So among 25,000 people with Len and placebo injections, only 4 people in Purpose 1 discontinued due to injection site reactions. And in Purpose 2, there were 15,000 injections, and only 29 people discontinued due to injection site reactions. And so we've kind of highlighted this piece, which is all the unique firsts in Purpose 1. So the first to include pregnant and lactating people, and the first to include adolescents. And this was really in response to the advocacy by pregnant people, as well as the doctors and clinicians and scientists who care for them and study outcomes in this group. In Purpose 2, we really focused on cis, gay, MSM, and trans people of color. And also, this was a first to include trans men and non-binary people in response to the advocacy, like No Data, No More, and other calls for inclusion. And in addition, we really believe that the combination of the innovation in the science and in health equity is what led to our unprecedented efficacy. And really, this program was the most globally, racially, ethnically, gender, and age diverse PrEP program ever, which we worked really hard to achieve. Right now, all Purpose 1 and 2 study participants are currently being offered open label Len, and 95% of people chose to go to open label Len. And they're receiving the injections in multiple different locations because we're studying alternative site locations. So they can receive them in all the locations. We did abdomen and thigh most commonly. We did thigh in a lot of the pregnant people as well. And Our work and our inclusion, we are really excited about because it avoided a 10-year delay on information in pregnancy, lactation, infant, or pediatric PK. So normally it takes 10 years to get that data into ART labels, and we were able to have it at the beginning, which we're very excited about. And this is another thing we're doing that's rather unique. We are filing truly globally because we want this product to go truly global. So in addition to the standard places we've applied and received approval in the US and the EU, when we got the CHMP positive opinion, which is the first step of the EU approval, that led to WHO pre-qual process kicking off, and the pre-qual was just approved in October of 2025, so this month. And now that we have pre-qualification, we can apply in the countries that are using the collaborative registrational procedure. So this allows low and low middle income countries that may have challenges resourcing a complex file like this to be able to use a stringent regulatory authorities approval like the EU or the FDA. And these are the countries that we're prioritizing. And these are the countries we're going to do the rest of this year. Argentina, Israel, Peru, Saudi Arabia, and the CRP countries. And let's see. So we talked about innovation in science and health equity, and this is our focus on innovation and access. We've never done this before. We have had a long history of providing our medicines to Africa and globally, but we signed voluntary licensing agreements with generic companies prior to filing with the US FDA within a few weeks of having the results from Purpose 1 and 2. We completed technology transfer and sharing of our IP. We're making a bridging supply to provide Lenacapavir for 2 million people for 3 years while we wait for the generics to get up and running. I told you about our simultaneous global filings. We're very excited about the CDC, the WHO guidelines and pre-qualification. And you've heard over the past few weeks about the multilateral agreements that we've signed with Global Fund and PEPFAR. And this is a picture of the timeline of when things happened. So we got the results. Our data monitoring committee was June 18th, 2024, and our FDA approval was June 18th, 2025. That is unheard of, especially for a program with like 9,000 plus participants. We got the Purpose 2 efficacy on September 11, 2024. We signed those voluntary licensing agreements in October, transferred IP before we filed with the FDA, and you can see all of the other pieces that we've been talking about, and the agreements with the Gates Foundation and different voluntary licensees, which are the generic companies, and other organizations are going to be developing low-cost len to supply in the most low and low middle income countries where HIV is disproportionately a burden. Okay, so really briefly, I just wanted to share, we talked about the results from Purpose 1 and Purpose 2. Last August, we presented the following results in Kigali. So Dr. Linda Gale Becker presented the information on Lenacapavir and TB drugs. So we know that there's a lot of places where people who are trying not to get HIV may also have TB. And we have figured out with our very brilliant pharmacometrics group how to administer len in these special situations. So if you have moderate or strong inducers, len can be administered, and the details of that are in the Yes2Go label, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. I'm not gonna go into all the details here, but that's also true for PDE5 inhibitors and statins. So we're going to be presenting more data about that coming up in the fall conferences. But you either basically give a double dose or one extra injection based on if it's a strong or moderate inducer. And we presented a deep dive on the pregnancy situation in Kigali, and most importantly, that the PK was similar in all the trimesters of pregnancy, postpartum, and that Len was present in breast milk, but concentrations were really low because of the poor oral absorption. So helpful for pregnant women and their infants, especially if they're breastfeeding. And we did a deep dive on adolescents and young people 16 to 25 that we also presented in Kigali. And basically here, there were no differences in Len plasma concentrations between youth and adults, again, supporting the Yes2Go label and many other labels showing that Len is approved for folks 35 kilograms and higher. And we also did a deep dive into the counterfactual HIV incidence piece, which again, I'm happy to talk to with folks afterwards. But on the right-hand bottom corner, you can see the other estimates of background HIV incidence from other metrics. And I think the point is that the background HIV incidence estimate was one of the most conservative measures, which makes it harder to show efficacy because you have a lower background HIV incidence that you're comparing to. And lastly, we also presented some preference data. Unsurprisingly, there were folks who really preferred the injectables, especially for the feeling of security and convenience and feeling of being protected. One of my favorite quotes from Purpose 2 was somebody who described Lenacapavir as an invisible bulletproof vest. This person was from the US, so that's why they use that explanation. But that it felt like having a bulletproof vest on to protect him from HIV. And then HPTN 102 and 103, you can see the primary objectives. These trials are 100% enrolled, and we are, these are the exploratory outcomes, and we are expecting results next year. And then Purpose 5 in France and the UK, also 100% enrolled, and Jean-Michel Molina will be presenting the demographics of enrollment at the EAKS conference sometime this week. So in summary, we're expecting the preliminary data, the primary data for the other 3 trials next year. And we're also moving from our pivotal trials to implementation science now, because we want to understand how to best to use Lenacapavir. So we have a couple 3B studies that we're doing in collaboration with Unitaid and Gates in South Africa and Brazil, and we're also doing the Propel studies where we're studying Len uptake in the United States. So that will be looking at people being prescribed Len and understanding persistence, uptake, and trying to figure out if what else we can do to support Lenacapavir uptake in the US. And so we have both prevention with purpose and access with purpose with these different implementation science projects. We're also going to be holding a call for implementation science later this year, where we're going to be putting out an RFP for people interested in doing implementation science with Lenacapavir. And then just really quick, our purpose forest is growing. We have Purpose 365, which is our annual formulation, because we like to out-innovate ourselves. So this once yearly formulation of Lenacapavir is quite potent. And you can see green is once yearly and pink is twice yearly Len. So these were the 2 different formulations, and we had high consistent exposure that lasted a year. It's insane. And this is a free acid formulation where Len sub-Q is a sodium salt. So again, our brilliant process chemistry people figured out a different formulation to get this amount of product into people. This is an intramuscular injection. So it's 2 IM injections and that's it. You get 2 IM shots and you're protected for a year. So we think. So we're studying that now. So the study, and the other thing that's really important is we had anecdotal data from the PURPOSE program, but we started using ICE in the middle of the program, so we didn't have full data. But here, with the PURPOSE 365, the 365 formulation, we studied it with and without ICE in the phase 1 study. So we have data that ICE is very helpful because blue is no pain, and we're able to improve the pain with pre-treatment ICE. And the other thing we're working on is, of course, long-acting orals, trying to make that happen. It's very challenging to get enough product into a pill that lasts for a whole week or a whole month. But we're working on it, and this is the trial design for PURPOSE 365. And we enrolled our first participant in July. Enrollment is going well. People are really interested in the annual formulation. And so here is our full tree. And I will stop now with our QR code. If you guys want to take a picture of this, the QR code links to all of our access plans globally. So I know that, and it's constantly updated. So anytime we have new news about approvals or access plans globally, we have it on this website. It's very hard to navigate to, but it's in the responsibility part of our website on global health and access, but we made this QR code to make it easier. So these are the presentations coming up next week at ID Week and being presented this week in Paris. And I will stop now and see if there's any questions.
Thank you very much. This was really superb, and what an amazing program, and something to be proud of. So we're proud of you for having led this effort. I'm going to open it up to questions. I think it's also very nice because in the room there are people who are actually we're participating in the 102 in PURPOSE 3 and 4 in the Bronx and in Harlem. So it's nice for them to see you. Okay, so I can open up to questions, but maybe I'll start by, and you come back to you, and also we're keeping an eye on what's happening online as well. I'm wondering if there's a lot of interest in the latter part of your presentation on the access issue, and people are very in a hurry, in terms of when are they going to have access to Lenacapavir, because of its potential impact in terms of decreasing the numbers of new infections, obviously. I mean, could you give us a sense in the United States, versus, globally it's a whole other issue, but do you feel like the major issues are going to be the access issues of people being aware of Lenacapavir, or do you think it's going to be the insurance and can they get it? Or, what's your sense? Because we have a very complex health system in this country.
So Lenacapavir, we got the approval on June 18th, and the first dose was given a week later. We shipped the next day. Somebody wrote the prescription, and the first dose was given at University of Washington, St. Louis. We had the physician who gave the first dose in San Francisco came down to Gilead to tell us his experience. And he's a young man, the physician, who is very AI savvy. So he created an AI algorithm to figure out why different private insurance companies were rejecting the drug. And he reverse engineered a questionnaire so he could answer the questions and get approval. So, like a lot of, No, he's super brilliant, and it just reminded me that I'm very old because I would have never thought to do that. But yeah, so he reverse engineered, and like, so he had an AI that was talking to their AI, which was hilarious. But and so he figured out a way. And then we have our Gilead Access program that is covering lenacapavir as well. So for example, for participants in Purpose 1 and 2 who prefer to roll over to commercial product, sorry, Purpose 2 in the United States, they can do so, and they can access the access program. And I can get you all the connections for that in the United States. There's some questions here.
Yeah, there's a question about the interactions with erectile dysfunction and medications. So maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, so you can take Len with Viagra, Cialis, and other erectile dysfunction medications. Len is a weak to moderate inhibitor, so you start low and go slow, basically, and that's the same answer for statins as well. And we're presenting, sorry, that was embargoed information, but we're presenting it. It's actually in our label as well. So we're going to present that at EACS, and it's in our label, the instructions for how to use lenacapavir with erectile dysfunction medication. So there is not a concern.
There's another question about will the Q 1 year Len require oral loading dose?
You know, I cannot remember right now. I don't know, but I can write back to the group and let you know if we're doing an oral loading dose or not.
And then another question is, can people kind of go back and forth between Len and oral PrEP? There might be some reason for doing so. Just curious how.
So there's been a lot of questions about the oral loading dose. So there's 2 pills on day 1 and 2 pills on day 2. So 2 pills of 300, so 600 milligrams on day 1 and day 2, and your injection is on day 1. The reason we do those pills is because Len is slow releasing from the depot. You don't get protective concentrations till like day 21 or 28. So if you take the oral pills on day 1 and day 2, you're protected at the treatment efficacy. Like, we don't know what the prevention efficacy threshold is, but you're at the treatment efficacy threshold, which we think is the prevention efficacy threshold, by 2 hours after the day 2 dose, 2 to 4 hours after the day 2 dose. So that's the oral loading. Now, if you are taking Len every 6 months and you decide that you don't want to be on Len and you want to take oral pills, you certainly can. You can also take Len weekly to bridge. So you can, if you're already on Len, and let's say like you're going to go on vacation and you won't be able to come back and get your injection with your doctor or your healthcare provider, you can take weekly Len, so 300 milligrams once a week, for up to 6 months for oral. We call that oral bridging. That came in handy during the clinical trial. People were doing that for various reasons. But people can definitely switch to oral PrEP. There's no reason why you can't switch. And if you still have active Len in your system, you'll just be extra protected if you switch to Descovy or Truvada.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So, question of what we know about Len and people who inject drugs. So, at ID Week, we're going to talk about Len and all the substance abuse because we had a lot of chemsex and other substance use. And then people who injected drugs were not excluded from Purpose 1 and 2, but we're doing Purpose 4 specifically to focus on them. I think Len has a lot of potential for people who inject drugs because it can be incorporated into syringe service programs, and it will help protect people for 6 months. So I think it has a lot of potential. I remember talking to Hansel about it when I was just first telling him about Purpose 1 and 2, and he's like, when can I start using it with my population? So yeah.
Yes, great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question was about Len with rifapentine, because we have recommendations for Len with rifampin and rifabutin. Now, again, I'm not a clinical pharmacologist, but I think rifapentine, you can use the rifabutin, a recommendation, because if you look at the US label, like just Google Yeztugo, it doesn't specifically call out the TB meds. It's all strong and moderate inducers. So if rifapentine is a moderate inducer, you can use the moderate inducer recommendation, which is basically a single extra injection of lenacapavir when you initiate. So, but we're not planning on studying it, so you're not going to have clinical data, but this is based on the pharmacology of the drugs that supported that recommendation.
It's an important question because the same population will need preventive therapy for TB as well. We have a question from, what about, did you screen for hepatitis B? And for in the studies, and what are your recommendations in people who have hepatitis B or hepatitis C?
So we screened for hepatitis B and C and continued to screen during the studies. Obviously, anyone with hepatitis B who also requires PrEP would probably do better with a tenofovir-based regimen because Len has no activity against hepatitis B, whereas both tenofovir alafenamide and tenofovir disoproxyl fumarate, so TAF and TDF do. With Hep C, it would just be prevention or treatment for Hep C, and trying to get cured, I think, would be the best option. Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking here, there are lots of questions coming in, but let's take one from the audience. Jessica, yeah.
Thanks for such a great talk. This is just a detail that you went through, and I may have missed it. You were saying that in Purpose 2, that it was Len versus TDF and not TAF because because of the efficacy had already been established in Purpose 1 for TAF, but I was just left wondering, why wasn't TAF the control arm in Purpose 2?
Yeah, it's because TAF is not approved for PrEP in all the different countries where we studied it. So we wanted to do Truvada so people could be on Truvada. Yeah.
There's a question here that I think there is no answer to. It's like, if you stop taking Len, how quickly can you get infected thereafter? Yeah.
So far in the world, we've only had 4 infections on lenacapavir. So, we don't want more people to get HIV on Len, but that's the only way to know what the actual prevention efficacy threshold is. Len stays in your body for a long time. So if you discontinue Len and continue to be at high likelihood of HIV acquisition, you should be on oral PrEP coverage as long as you continue to have an indication for PrEP.
Other questions? Okay, hold on. I'm trying to keep up. Oh, there's a question which I think could take maybe a few hours to discuss is how would you recommend, this is from someone from our teams overseas, is how would you recommend introducing lenacapavir in low-income countries?
So yes, that would take several hours. So I think the critical things are to have a reasonable infrastructure for being able to know where your recipients are and to remind them to come back and be able to bring people back within a 2-week window of, so they have to come back within 28 weeks. So it's Q26 weeks for the injection and they have a 2-week grace period. So you have to come back within 28 weeks. Now, I can't make doctor's appointments for my children at UCSF for their pediatrician because they got a new schedule every July and like you can't ever make an annual appointment and that's at UCSF. But for some reason, I was always able to make annual appointments for my dog at his vet. So I don't know what I mean, it's because they get new fellows and blah, blah, blah at UCSF in the pediatrics department. But long story short, you really need to be able to find your people and bring them in. And so I think that's one of the critical things. The other thing is we have worked with JPIGO and WHO and many people to develop resources for implementation of LEN. So we have a full package and training materials and all of that is available online. And the other thing I would shout out is there's a website called Ask Gilead Medical that has a lot of medical information and implementation information that works for the US and for globally. But if you Google Ask Gilead Medical, there's all kinds of like questions that physicians ask us. If a lot of people are asking the same question, we put the answer with all the resources onto that website. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yes, okay. Oh, any possible interactions between LEN and family planning medications in women?
Great question. So that is going to be a presentation at ID Week, but the answer is no. So we studied LEN with oral contraceptives and long-acting hormonal contraceptives, and there were no expected drug-drug interactions, and there are no drug-drug interactions. We'll present the detailed pharmacokinetic data at ID Week. We're also presenting, it's the same answer for gender-affirming hormone therapy. So any exogenous hormones, LEN can be administered with no impact bidirectionally.
I think, Hugh, I think we're good. Okay, I think we're exhausted, I think, the questions, but I want to thank you, Moupali, for a superb presentation, and I think this was incredibly illuminating, and it's really exciting to see also not just the initial clinical trials, the efficacy studies, but also your commitment to what happens next beyond that, in terms of more research, but also in terms of the access issues and so on. So I want to thank everybody here and everybody online, and stay tuned for the next ICAP Grand Rounds. Thank you. Yeah. Mitch was online. He
Yeah,
sends
I
a
saw
thank
his
you.
question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What? Okay, so here, I'm going to give you the exact. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, yeah. Okay. This was pregnancy, and this is TB drugs. So If you are on a strong inducer, you take, like, let's say rifampin. You start, oh, this is missing dose, so this is rifampin. You take the 2 pills and the injections, the regular one,